The School of Spiritual Training. The School of Spiritual Training describes the process of adoption within the group of applied and practical spiritual ecology, Don Uriel, of a small group of aspirants to sacred warriors who requested to join it in their efforts in favor of the awakening that the groups of guardians of the earth are conducting, and also the planning carried out by Agustín and Paloma for their spiritual training is described in certain special and sacred places of Lake Chapala. The new groups. The young student of architecture Arturo Guerrero and his beautiful fiancée, Mariana Ventura, a pedagogy student, were an enthusiastic and harmonious couple that, along with their own small group, constituted a new and vibrant contribution to the work of our group Don Uriel. This small and young group, which Paloma and I knew because of our new work as university professors, aim sincerely towards the achievement of a high spirituality to work with us. For this reason, they ask us to join their small group with us to the efforts that, with the same goal, our group, Don Uriel, was making in the west of our country. Due to the evident fact that all their members were in a learning stage, Paloma and I made a mutual reflection of our last experiences. We remembered the dangers that loom on those exposed to the celebration of sacred rituals and works in which certain telluric energy is present without a suitable personal fortification and spiritual purification. Consequently, and instead of looking for the group accomplishment of immediate tasks on the service of awakening, we decided to take this young group to some sacred places in which the energy of our ancestral spirit flows powerful, to help in this way to obtain its group cohesion and its individual strength. Accordingly, Paloma and I understood that the immediate task that the Spirit of Mexico requested now of the Center Don Uriel was not a work of spiritual ecology in particular or in a particular natural environment. It rather needed a work of sacred agriculture in which, perhaps due to have journeyed a little more in the spiritual path, Paloma and I could help the members of this small group to fortify and grow a little more as warriors of the light could. The aforementioned would depend, of course, and largely on the own internal work and willpower of each one of its members. Nonetheless, the effort was worth the trouble to transmit and to share our own experiences, successes, and failures with this new group, stating clearly that nor Paloma nor I consider ourselves teachers of anybody, but only, perhaps, older brothers giving testimony of their humble experiences in the path of waking up. Sacred agriculture. Humanity's sacred history shows us clearly that our elder brothers and sisters that have managed to go beyond their personal ego and have purified their hearts to put themselves to the service of the highest one, have looked for and found time and time again the answers and the inner strength they needed in the contact with our Mother Nature. Therefore, for Paloma and me, it was not difficult to find the ideal place for the spiritual work and fortification of this young association in the north shore of Laguna Sagrada. Our immediate objective would be to visit, during our available weekends and holidays, certain sacred spaces and some special sites where it was possible to interact in complete freedom with our natural environment in a portion of the north shore of Lake Chapala that goes from the town of Chapala to the town of Jocotepec. Consequently, and during our first group meeting, we decided to visit the immediate future as at the both parishioners, 5 Catholic churches in the towns of Chapala: San Antonio, Ajijic, San Juan Cozalá, and Jocotepec. These religious constructions, built by the Spaniards in old settlements of Nahuatl origin, located in the north shore of the sacred lake, long before the arrival of Hernán Cortés to Mexico, had strategic locations and specific religious artistic representations. For these particular characteristics, they still preserve in their interior the celestial energy on a concentrated way. Later, we would ascend by some well-known mountain trails with the intention of reaching during the day special places located high in the mountains and crowned by white crosses that are the object of pilgrimages and processions in special religious days. In one of our fortuitous encounters at the university, Arturo, a little intrigued about our future plans, commented, "Agustin, it's not very clear to me what will be the message, or to a certain extent the learning, that we will be able to extract from our visit to totally natural places, in where it does not exist any presence of the human intellect. Aside from that, the visit to churches and sacred spaces created by humankind have for me enough sense, since of such sites enough knowledge can be extracted." "Remember, Arturo," I answered, "that nature, undeniably being not of a human origin, it is necessarily a divine creation, and it has as a result in itself all the wisdom that is possible to extract of God's presence in this limited three-dimensional world, by all those capable to see it and to listen to its messages in appropriate inner silence. Unfortunately, we cannot say in fact the same of our present Western civilization, dominated by an atheist scientific materialism. Our current civilization is simply a byproduct of the ego-fixed human intellect that considers Mother Nature only as a raw material to exploit. This for the benefit of a few powerful groups that have been destroying it systematically. The human intellect," I continued, "is able to provide us only with an imperfect and distorted interpretation of the divine wisdom, no matter how amazing or beautiful it may seem to us at any given moment. In nature we do not find any interpretation. We directly find God that has been its creator, and I must add that we ourselves, being also the creation of God, can find Him within our hearts." The 5 luminaries. As a preparatory introduction, and based on the knowledge that Paloma and I had acquired thanks to previous works in the sacred lake, I decided to initiate an informal talk during our group meeting to put our new sacred warrior partners into context with the ethnic, historical, and spiritual conditions prevailing in the chosen region. We will visit first the church of Chapala, I began saying, built in the dominion of the chief Chapalac in Chapalan, whose name in the Nahuatl language means cricket floating in the water. Once it was subjugated by the presence of the Spanish settlers, the chief Chapalac was baptized and received the name of Martin de Chapala. The Franciscan friar Fray Miguel Bologna, I continued, established towards 1538 the Spanish version of the town of Chapala and constructed a hermit hut seated on top of the hill of the locality, the hill of San Miguel, where he lived until his death. The church of Chapala, built in its beginnings with adobe and grass in 1548, received the name of San Francisco. Currently, the town of Chapala has 40,000 inhabitants. We will also visit the church of Tlayacapan, San Antonio, whose name that comes from the Nahuatl language means the place of the offerings to the man. It was the seat of the first Catholic church founded on the north shore of Lake Chapala by the Franciscans towards 1539. This, after the Pacific surrendering of the Cocas and Cascanes tribes that lived in the area hunting and farming long before the arrival of the Spaniards. Our following visit will be to the church of the locality of Ajijic or Ajijique, from the Nahuatl word that means the place where the water is born. His first settlers of Nahuatl origin arrived towards 1300 after Christ from San Juan Cosala, finding in this spot Tarascos and Purépechas that came from Michoacán, living in their borders and to which they displaced. Arguably, Ajijique received originally the last of the 7 tribes that came from one of the 7 caves of the Aztlán. That means whiteness in the Nahuatl language. After the arrival of the Spaniards to the region, the Franciscans built the first church in 1535. Reconstructed towards 1550 after a hurricane knocked down the church, currently the town of Ajijic has approximately 15,000 inhabitants. Next, we will visit the church of Cutzalan, San Juan Cosala, name of Nahuatl origin that means the one of many warm springs, governed by the Nahuatl chief Jitomatl, that controlled an ample zone of the shore. Jitomatl surrendered pacifically to the Spanish conquerors, who baptized him with the name of Juan Bautista de Cosala. Its population is of approximately 33,000 inhabitants that have an admirable religious devotion and attachment to their traditional customs. Our last visit will be to the church of Huhutepeque, Jocotepec, whose name comes from the Nahuatl language and means the hill of acid fruits, a settlement populated by Nahuatl tribes since 1361, and whose inhabitants constructed a pyramid to honor their god Iztlacateotl, and turned this locality into an important ceremonial center and commercial interchange for the surrounding mountainous areas. In addition, they founded Chantepec, today turned into a suburb of Jocotepec, towards 1529, and once Hitomatl, that controlled the region, had surrendered pacifically to the Spanish crown, Franciscan friars initiated the process of converting its settlers into Catholicism, building the foundations of the Catholic Church on the top of the ruins of the Nahuatl temples, which they destroyed. By those times, there were two new religious protectors of the locality, Nuestro Señor del Monte and Nuestro Señor del Guaje. Conscious that I still counted with the total attention of my listeners, and a little nervous when I noticed that our outstanding student Andres was even taking some notes, I decided to extend a little bit my exposition. In spite of having a reduced number of foreign inhabitants, I affirmed with conviction, the population of Jocotepec, estimated in about 38,000 inhabitants, still preserves its traditions linked to the Mexican culture. Examples of this are its dominical strolls around the greater kiosk on its main plaza, restaurants of goat meat and appetizers, and a good number of curanderos and healers skilled in the use of medicinal plants that attract numerous visitors from the region. The syncretism. Arguably, the first settlers of Lake Chapala were nomadic tribes who lived in it around 1,000 years before Christ existed. Later, Nahuatl settlers established different communities in the shore, speaking different languages due to the lack of intercommunication between their communities. Many of them venerated the god Iztaccatl-Teotl. In opposition to what one could think, and despite counting with an increasing number of foreigners from other countries residing in its north shore, I insisted, the 5 localities mentioned preserve intact their beliefs and all religious traditions. In all the towns I mentioned, several annual celebrations take place in honor of the Virgin of Guadalupe, the crucifixion of Jesus in Easter, and ritual pilgrimages due to the Christmas typical posadas, in addition Christmas carols, celebrations for the Day of the Dead, celebrations for the independence of Mexico, the Carnival of Chapala, the Carnival of San Antonio, the Day of the Holy Cross, and the Day of the Holy Rosary. All these celebrations are joined by an enormous amount of manifestations of the joy and creativity of the townspeople, such as fireworks, folkloric dances, artisan tianguis, piñatas, parades, cowboy charreadas, allegorical cars, mariachis, and traditional music. Exquisite Mexican delicacies, religious events, religious services, games, altars for the dead, serenades, the sounding of bells, and enormous and impressive colorful decorations with which each town dresses itself during the celebration. Wow, I had never been that aware of the enormous wealth and manifestations of folklore, life and vigor of our people, commented Arturo. And we are only referring to 5 pueblitos and the north shore of Lake Chapala, added Mariana, also impressed. It is due to the syncretism intervened with certain shyness our silent companion Andres. The syncre what? Asked Adriana, interested and intrigued at the same time. To the syncretism affirmed with conviction Andres, which is a combination and blending of different systems of philosophical or religious beliefs and practices that our Mexican culture has been manifesting as the creative and vigorous fusion tied up during the last 489 years between two cultures, the Nahuatl and the Spanish. This fusion started the 12th of December of 1531 with our holy and first crossbreed mestiza, our dark brown Virgin of Guadalupe, that brought us the good news and the elevation of the spirit of the new era of the loving, creative, and conciliatory fusion of two visions of the sacred that must grow and live in all and each one of us deep down inside our hearts. After a long silence motivated by the wise words of Andres, Paloma commented, "How right you are, Andres, when you mention our Celestial Mother as the true originator of our deep spiritual Mexico, and to the world views of our two mother cultures as universal truths that have transcended the time and are present and operating in many of our current traditions and convictions." The sacred symbols. Even though these reflections, as well as the interesting exposition of Agustín, are enlightening for us all, Paloma continued, they are no more than mere superficial and limited rationalizations. Nevertheless, Agustín and I are sure that a degree of this deep and transcendental knowledge exists transmitted as energy and not precisely as intellectual understanding in the sacred spaces that are product of our syncretism. Some of these spaces are, for instance, the previously mentioned churches, which are located in zones where the Nahuatl culture predominated and whose enclosures, in spite of the designs of the conquerors and Spanish friars, were not necessarily constructed in its totality by them. "Then by whom?" asked Adriana, with great curiosity. "Well, by these same early residents of Nahuatl origin that were conquered and turned into the Catholic faith, right?" Andres intervened. "Exactly," I answered. "Remember that the Spaniards knew perfectly of the majesty and mastery and skills of the Nahuatl people as constructors, whose craftsmen were pyramid builders, and to avoid the payment of their own manual labor, they simply forced them to erect their religious enclosures, carrying in that sin their own penance." "What do you mean by that, Agustín?" asked intrigued Arturo, like a good student of architecture. "Well, to the fact that although the Nahuatl builders followed exactly the instructions of the construction blueprints they received, they had complete freedom in their artistic expression, a fact that they took advantage of to shape in some special places a lot of their knowledge and religious beliefs, which gave sense to their existence and complemented their own cosmovision. They took good care to disguise these expressions within the religious iconography to protect them from suppression," I affirmed. "I believe that Agustín is talking about the symbols and what they represent," Andres commented. When seeing the smiles and the glances of approval of Agustín and Paloma, Andres continued, "Although I personally have read it between the lines in several books and expressed by several writers, that is suggested with subtlety and not in an evident way. I am convinced with these authors that the contemplation of sacred symbols is the sublime form of union with God. But if you speak to establish communication with the sacred symbols, is not this again a rational process by necessity? Asked Arturo. No, it is not, Arturo, answered Paloma, because our communication with the symbols is always through our contemplation of them, and in the language of the inner silence, which does not imply at all the use of reasoning. It is rather a species of reckoning from the heart. The archetypes. Every time more confused, Arturo continued in defense of his argument. But then, even supposing that we establish this type of real communication with the sacred symbols, how are these going to answer to us? In silence as well? That type of answer, pointed Paloma, is very difficult to explain by means of the words and the reason, and this is not in any way some excuse to turn aside your question or to avoid its answer. I only know for sure and by personal experience that your heart receives the impressions that your inner silence have managed to formulate, and that these impressions come from your soul, from your internal and spiritual being, where all the answers exist and where a universal communion with all the creation and with its creator exists. But they are not transmitted in intelligible language to the mind. It is rather a language that our Holy Spirit uses in our name to communicate us with our Creator. And it is more of an intuitive nature than a rational one. If we could decipher its language just a little bit, continued Paloma, we could say that at a higher spiritual levels, they operate in the form of, after a prolonged silence motivated by the effort of Paloma to find the right word, Andres decided to intervene. Archetypes. Exactly, Andres. This is the word that I was looking for, pointed Paloma. But please continue, she added. Thank you. Well, what I know is that the archetypes are the molds that exist behind all that is manifested in the world of the causes, and not in the world of the effects. We in our natural habitat, continued Andres, live in the manifested world that belongs rather to the world of the effects and not to the world of the causes. And even though with our actions we do generate new effects, we confront basically in our existence most of the effects of the previous actions that we ourselves cause with our free will. I believe that all of us accept the fact that we have free will and that we can, in spite of how difficult our personal circumstances might be, decide what course of action we give to our lives to achieve our life purposes. We have two options: to follow the commands of our own personality, our personal ego and sense of self-importance, which always looks for personal and selfish benefits that will complicate consequently our present existence and the scene prepared for us, or to follow the originating impressions of our soul, our spirit, which by means of being connected indissolubly with the ultimate reality and the divine plan, will help our existence to develop in agreement to the will of our Creator. And this, by all means, with our own free and voluntary participation in the drama of existence. After a dense silence motivated in all of us no longer by the confusion but by the creative reflection, Arturo asked, "Okay, but what about the archetypes?" "Precisely," Andres responded. "The archetypes comprise the gradual unfolding in the superior worlds of the divine will and are therefore being apprehended by those who make the necessary effort." Andres wants to refer us to the archetypes that are present in the world of the causes, that is of an intuitional or superior mental nature, or even of an abstract nature, and whose secrets cannot be deciphered by the reasoning of our concrete and analytical mind. No instrument of analysis created in the world of the effects can discern the truths that exist in the world of the causes of archetypical, where the will of our Creator resides. In that world, as Bodhidharma said, the more we think, the less we understand, and the less we think, the more we understand. Those that do not understand understanding, and those who that already understand not understanding. The true vision takes place only in an empty mind, because only then one is in the present moment, which is the only reality that participates at any moment of the divine manifestation. This is why the symbols are among the most powerful images that we can count on to try to establish a connection between both spheres of manifestation. Our sacred codex. "Listen," Adriana intervened. "I accept everything that you're saying because it has enough consistency and my heart feels genuinely attracted before these truths. And forgive me for asking, but could you provide to me a concrete example of some symbol that is especially powerful and important? Or, on the other hand, of some church whose characteristics enclose keys to awaken or at least to establish some sort of communication between our being and the spirit of our nation and its symbols, maybe even with our own script or specific task in this existence?" After some minutes of a spontaneous and refreshing silence, during which surely many of the ideas poured by all began to settle in our hearts, Paloma started to talk. "What an interesting question you have made to all, Adriana, and I believe that you know clearly that an easy answer for the same does not exist. Nevertheless, I will try at least to give you some leads on the matter based solely on my personal experience." Cleaning discreetly her eyes dampened by the emotion that she was feeling, Paloma continued. "To give you a concrete example that, to my humble understanding, exists in our Mexico of a church in where the endless number of symbols exist of both traditions and that is characteristic of a Mexican spirituality, I will necessarily refer you to the more sublime example that we have and that is evident for those able to perceive it and interpret it correctly in the architecture, paintings, sculptures, light, and other physical and space-related elements that make an evident reference to the most sacred that confirms us as a nation in the mystical and the spiritual. And I speak, of course, of the new Basilica of Guadalupe in Mexico City. However, Paloma continued, if we're talking about symbols only, many of which are in our churches, To my humble understanding again, the most powerful and important, and I clarify to you this is one of the many that now exist, in my opinion the most sublime of them all, it is without a doubt our Codex Guadalupano, or the sacred image of our beloved Virgin of Guadalupe, guardian deity of our nation and queen of the American continent. Her venerated image is an authentic codex symbol able to awaken hearts and to lavish spiritual light and energy of an enormous and highest vibration. Her miraculous appearance in our sacred territory as of 1531 made possible what the Spanish friars did not manage to obtain, not in the least: the conversion of millions of inhabitants of all the ethnic groups belonging to the valley of Anahuac and on all the corners of the Aztec Empire. Unlike the Spanish conquerors in the beginning, the Aztecs knew how to recognize immediately the symbolic messages that existed in the image imprinted in the sacred ayate of Juan Diego Cuauhtlacoatzin. It speaks of the origin of our great nation and of its ethnic spiritual fusion of two races, two cultures and two nations under the shade and protection of the Mother of God. This event transformed without a doubt the heart of the Aztec people, filling them with hope before the news of the future coming of the sixth son and of the good news of the descent of the divine Son of Ometeotl, our Christ Jesus. Without saying anything, in complete silence and in a very spontaneous way, the group Don Uriel arranged with respect the sacred elements of both traditions, and after the entrance and ritual beginning of its ceremonial session, Paloma directed our group prayer that consisted in a rosary in honor of our Celestial Mother. The fervor with which that Wednesday evening we elevated our hearts to our beautiful young lady, Tecuatlapiu Guadalupe, resonated in the sacred spirit of our great nation.